I am your host, Nicole Will, and we're so happy you're here as we navigate the world with your aging loved one. We are here to come alongside older adults, family members, and the senior living community as we explore the world of aging and elder care with helpful resources, informative interviews, and approachable conversation. We get to do this together, so join us on our journey, and this is the Will Gather podcast. How will we know what's possible as we age if we do not have a relationship with older adults? What happens when we stop and realize the blessings? Today, my guest is Isabel Tom. She is the author of The Value of Wrinkles, a young perspective on how loving the old will change your life. She's been featured on numerous radio shows and podcasts and gets to share her story about what it's like to grow up in a multi-generational house and took part in caring for her grandparents who lived to the age of 98 and 102. And professionally, Isabel has served in the senior living and hospice care field for numerous years. Today, we talk about how we find ourselves because of this journey, why it's important to seek and cultivate those relationships, how our own fear of aging can impact us, and why it's time to address our views about the older generation and how we let go of some of those assumptions, the resiliency that we learn from others, and how we find ways to connect and have good conversation, why it's important to find community, and what leads to contentment as we grow older, the blessing of older adults as an untapped resource. I enjoyed this conversation so much. There are rich blessings that are full of gratitude. Here is my interview with Isabel Tom. We finally get to meet today after months of corresponding, but I'm so happy you're here. It's a fun day for me. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Nicole. I'm glad to be here and glad to get to meet with you via Zoom.
Yes, I know. It's so fun. Oh my gosh, technology, the things that we have access to now, it makes it so great. We can see each other's faces. We share a commonality of the connection with our grandparents and being able to grow up with them in our home. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what brought you to write your book, The Value of Wrinkles?
Sure, I've got to reach back, I think, all the way to when I was
Yeah.
born. But basically, I lived in a multi-generational household, and my parents came over here from Hong Kong for college. And then, as my dad's parents were getting older, his parents, they invited them over to the US and they ended up living with our family. So I'm the youngest of three. And by the time I was born, they were already my grandparents, who I call Mama and Yaya. That's in Cantonese. They were living with us. And I basically, they walked us to school. They were sitting at the dinner table with us every night, ate breakfast with us. I mean, their room was right next door to mine. And I basically lived in the same household with them until I was 26. There's like a little, it's really confusing to explain, I guess, in my 20s after college, but I lived with them in the same house until I was 26, and my grandpa passed when I was 27. My grandma passed when I was 35. So they lived to 98 and 102.
Wow.
And I mean, they were so much part of my childhood and even adult life. So
Yeah. I love how you talk about you were drawn to Yi's room, where that room was the place to be and such a part of your life where you just wanted to spend time there.
yeah, yeah is my grandpa and Mama is my grandma, and
Okay.
their room was right next door. And I think it was because they were always in their room.
Yeah.
I mean, my grandpa watched a lot of TV, and we were allowed to watch that much TV. So it's kind of like a place you just like run
Right.
another place where somebody's always there, somebody's always in the room. My
Mhm.
grandpa would be sitting in his rocker like chair, and then my grandma would be like reading the newspaper. And so, yeah, that was just part of life. I
Yeah.
think I did realize that I didn't have any friends necessarily who lived with their grandparents. So I
Mhm.
did know it was different. Yeah. I mean, that was my job. That was the way I grew up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't, now that I think about it, I don't think I had any friends that had their grandparents living with them either. And I love that my grandparents, same thing. My grandma had TV in her room and she was always watching shows that my mom wouldn't let us watch. So we would try to
Aw.
sneak and watch, whatever mystery or detective show she was watching at the time. But I love that you also talk about the conversation around language. I feel like right now we use a lot of different terms, and I know there's not like necessarily a right or
So hard.
wrong words to use, but and no perfect term exists. Why why is this? Why do we have a hard time picking what words to use? And then I know you chose the word old, and why do you use that term?
Well, I'll say now I usually use older adult because that is what
Mhm,
I kind of was taught and is like the accepted way, at least where, the places that I worked, older adult. But
mhm,
it's tough. I always hesitate in which word to use, like in my book and when I'm speaking, because
mhm,
I think most people will use the word old. And then when you look into the more professional setting, then people will use another term.
mhm,
And I found that, I've talked with older adults, older people, and some of them will say, I don't care. I don't care about this one or this one, but I don't like this term. And so I've never found one
mhm,
term that like people are just over the moon about. But I think the problem is that people have different definitions for words, and that happens with any word. And the problem with the word old is a lot of times when people use it, there's a negative connotation to it. And through my experiences, and the reason why I wrote my book is because I have come to see it as something really honorable and something like as a really good thing. So
mhm,
I would love to just be able to use it freely, the word old, and to help people think of it differently. But I do know that like it can trigger some people and it's just a confusing thing. So I think it's really our hearts and how we value the people,
mhm.
around us, whether they're older or younger or whoever they are, just valuing them
Yeah.
is, I feel like, comes with using I think it's more important than using the right term because there's never going to
Mhm.
be a perfect term.
That's such a good point where it is the heart behind when we're talking about growing older. I think that's so true. There's terminology we use it more in the professional setting, and then words that people use all around us. And just knowing that there's going to be differences and asking the question. I think that's so true. Like asking older adults, what do you prefer?" Because
Yeah.
it changes, and it's different for everybody.
And I think ultimately, if you know them and you get the chance to develop a relationship with them, you use their name.
Mhm.
You don't say,
Exactly.
hey, old person.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. In the book, and I'll say this in my intro also, but I enjoyed reading every page and learned so much and reminisced and thought about my own perspectives. And so I encourage everyone to grab it and read it. And you talk about how you find yourself because of this journey that you went through. What did you find in yourself that surprised you or added so much value?
So I think an interesting fact I should share is that when I wrote the manuscript for this book, like I had to cut a lot out. So I had a whole nother file called leftover paragraphs that was longer than the actual manuscript.
Wow.
So I would say there's like even more. And every day I like reflect and I learn something more about the experiences that I've had. So I think it's just like the growth of I like to say, going from grumbling to being grateful for my grandparents.
Mm,
Because I think
mhm,
as a child, like, yes, as a child, I enjoyed being like spoiled and getting treats and getting hugs. But I think I came to this point where I was like, this is so annoying. None of my other friends have to live with their grandparents. And sometimes it holds you back and it's, interfering with my schedule. And, just when you're growing up, you don't see those things. But then now that I've
mhm,
gotten older and becoming a parent, like I think it's just the fact that it was a journey where I came to appreciate like that I had actually a gift, like a really great gift that I got to grow up with them. And I didn't see it as a gift then. So it was kind of like that aha moment. And, just I think there are just so many different things where I thought it was a pain. And then I was like, wow, God really blessed me with, I always tell parents, like an extra layer of love and
Mhm.
adoration and attention that I think like kids all over the world need, especially
Mhm.
nowadays. And it helped me to be more confident growing up. It helped me to try new things. It helped me to succeed. And it really was just because I had this extra, I had my parents, but then I had this extra a set of adults who just like were like, you're great. Like you have a funny haircut and glasses and all this, but you are still valuable, right? Like they valued me. And now I think in turn, now I see like, wow, they were so valuable. And so I want older people to see that they have value.
And there's that extra layer of just the relationships that we get to develop and other people pouring into your life. And it's exactly like you said, if all kids had extra layers of people that just continued
Yeah.
to encourage them and support them and love them. What else would you say and share with people on just the importance of what do we get out of those relationships when we develop them with older adults? I can already name so many blessings, but
Every time people ask me questions, I get flooded with all the
yeah.
different things. And I'm like, oh, do I want to overwhelm them or not?
Right.
I think we live in this culture where people are so rushed. I live in the DC area. So people
Mm,
are like, you literally go outside and people are like, you don't even get to talk to them. They're going to their car, they're going to the next program, they're doing this and that. And people are on their phones and there's all this technology. It's just so busy.
mm,
And I feel like all of us really yearn for somebody to just sit down and talk with us and give us their undivided attention. And one thing that I have found that I love now, like as a mom, is I love meeting. I have my own podcast, right? And I love
mhm,
to interview other older people. And I love to just sit there and listen to them. And I feel like they give me their undivided attention. And I have a chapter in my book called I've Got Time for You. And I feel like it just
mhm,
kind of like covers this whole idea that, yeah, as somebody gets older, they may not be working full time and they don't have that busy schedule that sometimes we feel like makes us so special. But what
mhm.
they do is they have time and they're slow down. And I think it helps. It's just very meaningful to me because I think that's how you develop relationships. So I would say that is one of the biggest things. Like, I think the other thing for somebody our age is probably having somebody to learn from. Really depends. Some people have older people in their lives where they're like, I don't want to be around them. He's so negative or whatever, the stereotype of the grumpy old man. But I feel like if you can find somebody who's older, who has a ton of experiences, and oftentimes that they're willing to and they love the opportunity just to share their story and to share their wisdom and to
Mhm.
have somebody listen to them. Like I have learned so much. Just the last podcast episode I did where I interviewed an older woman, like she was not trying to teach me a lesson. But as I listened, I was like, wow, like I'm learning,
Mhm.
I'm keeping my ears open because they really have gone through so much
Mm,
that can
mhm,
encourage us and help
mhm,
us to not feel alone. There's a lot
mhm.
of commonalities, even though it seems like there's not
Yeah.
from the outside.
I know we think of, oh, there's so much change in our world right now. And I remember having some conversation with my residents and even my grandma. That generation experienced more change than we could ever imagine. And so realizing we've got so much we can learn from and pull from, knowing that they've had to navigate so many different moments in history. And not only that, but in their own lives. I love the sentence where you say, when we listen, we become more compassionate. And having the ability when we hear stories and when we can listen to what they're sharing with us, and then we just develop that even more compassion and empathy to provide that care.
Yeah, I think, I just had this experience just this week where it was with my own family where I feel like a lot of times we think we know what's going on in somebody's head or we think we know how they're feeling. And I think if we can listen or if we try to find opportunities to ask questions
Mhm.
where we can learn more about them, like it really is very powerful. You learn more about the trauma they may have experienced, and then you understand why they act a certain
The
way.
way,
And
yeah.
it really is, I think it's necessary. especially as people who are younger, because we actually have only, especially if you're talking about caring for your own family, like we've actually only known our loved ones for the last, whatever, however many years of however long you've lived. So 30, 40 years, but they have all these experiences that they've gone through in their childhood, in their, younger adult years that we don't know about, that probably have shaped them into who they are today. So,
Right. One of my residents taught me my favorite pot roast recipe that I still use to this day. All
oh,
the, tips and tricks on baking or cooking, or when I was pregnant, they had lots of advice, some great advice on raising babies. And yeah, just so much richness in that history.
and I think it's fun too. Like when I was pregnant with my oldest, who's 10, almost 10 now, I remember being so afraid of like the birthing process. And I remember asking my grandma, like, what about for you? And she started talking about, when she had my dad, who was her oldest. And basically, she ended up sharing a story of how she had to walk 2 hours to go to the hospital. And she basically said, like, it was no big deal. But
Yeah.
when I heard that first part of that story, like, you walked 2 hours to the hospital, and it gave me perspective.
Yeah. Exactly. Our 20-minute drive doesn't seem so bad.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, wow. I've found that some perspectives could be maybe out of sight, out of mind, for lack of a better term. And if
Yeah.
we're around older adults, then we have to look at our fear around aging and maybe what's to come. How do we face our own fear? And how does that impact our view on growing older and interacting with older adults?
Yeah, I think what you say, like out of sight, out of mind, that always makes me really sad because
Mm,
you do hear people, and you have worked with older adults, and I'm sure you've had people ask you, like, oh, isn't that so sad? And I feel like just because something's sad doesn't mean that you like run away and ignore the people
mhm,
who could use your help and your presence. So I think what happens is that when you spend time with older people, and I think for a lot of people, they're limited or they feel limited to their grandparents, or if they don't have grandparents, then it's just their aging parents or their neighbors or something like that. But when you spend time with older more older people, I think you find that aging is not as, at least the things that we're afraid of
mhm,
are not as bad as they
mhm,
really are. And I think as we learn to appreciate people who are older than us, then we learn to appreciate how we can grow and the cool things that can happen in our lives, and how we can still be a contribution to society, how we can still encourage people. I mean, I remember on Valentine's Day, one day being at a retirement community, and in the elevator, this lady who was like over 90 said to her friend, oh, it's Valentine's Day. I'm going to go call my friends who are lonely and cheer them up today. And I was like, she is over 90 and has an excuse to just be like, I'm just going to do nothing.
yeah.
And that was just so encouraging. And I think, sometimes as you get older, you think you're going to be useless, but you don't have to be.
Mhm,
So talking and actually being in the presence of older adults, I think can help us with that. And it helps us to be more conscious of the words, the way that we use words like old.
mhm,
Because when we say things like, oh, I'm getting old, that's actually can be really offensive to somebody who is older. Like, what are you
mhm.
trying to say about
Yeah.
that?
I love that she wanted to call everyone on Valentine's Day. I bet that
Oh,
really cheered
yeah.
up so many people.
And I've met so many people
Mhm.
like that. One of the ladies I interviewed in my book, I think she lived to 103 when my book was published, and she would, up until that year that she passed, she would go to, it was a CCRC, so she lived in an independent living. She would every Tuesday walk to the assisted living part of the community and visit the residents who were there, who were newly moved in, and like leave notes for them. Like this was something she was doing after 100.
Wow.
She would cut coupons for like military families, like just, it was amazing and so
Mhm,
inspiring. But it's just
mhm.
something, it's not like she was a professional, I don't know, athlete, or that doesn't even make sense, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean? She wasn't like
Yeah.
a big shot celebrity or anything like
Right.
that,
Right.
but she was making an impact like right in her
Mm,
community.
I don't know if you feel like this, but right now, as a culture and as a nation, having more of a conversation around ageism and fighting assumptions and stereotypes and things like that. You talk about like how this is really the time to address our views about the older generation and how do we let go of some of those assumptions?
That's a tough and really big question.
Hmm.
I think it goes back to the heart of it. I mean, I think I struggle with all of the, I guess, some of the conversations, because I think it's like sometimes it's centered around the just the words we use, or but I think it really comes down to like valuing. It's not about just learning how to value older people. It's just learning how to value people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think the reason why that I have focused on valuing older people is because we naturally don't seem to do that in our
Hmm.
society. And so I think if we can learn to just value the person next to us, whether we agree with them or
Mhm.
not, value the people around us, whether, they're different than us, like one of the reasons why I love trying to teach kids how to value and appreciate older adults is because I think it teaches them how to relate with people who are different than them.
Mm.
And it's a good space to do it, because older adults are very gracious to the younger generation, right? But I think even when I'm teaching my kids about a different culture, or people who have health conditions, or a medical condition, and it might be a child who's the same age as them, well, I'm just teaching them how to appreciate somebody who has a different story. And that's
Mhm.
exactly what it is for older adults. It's
Mhm.
just sometimes we have to help people to get past that, and to help them to see that there's this huge story behind just the face. And I think for a lot of older adults, they actually don't feel old.
Mhm.
They still feel like their younger self. I've had a number of people say that to me. Their body just might not work along with how they feel. But to understand and really get to know them and want to develop a relationship with them. So I think it's going to go by relationship after relationship. Like it's going to
Mhm.
take those relationships that's going to make our stereotypes to be more not negative stereotypes, and to help people to have an accurate view of
Mhm.
what older people are like. And there's really not one way to describe them.
Yeah. How do you value anyone that's different from you are? And that's a heart issue. That is looking at anyone who is from any different part of life or whatever
Yeah.
age and just saying, I value you because you are a person and you are made whole and all of that. And I think that that's such a great way to describe that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what it really comes down
Hmm.
to.
Hmm.
It's just learning to value the people around us, because the people who are older now, like we're going to be older too. So
Hmm.
I think that's the thing. The term old is
Hmm.
really, it's changing. There are going to be more people. Every
Hmm.
single person is going to join that category if they get to live to an older age. So
Yeah, and I was with a relative of mine, and she had come out of the bathroom, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I looked in the mirror and was like, who is this woman looking back at me?" She was an older relative, and just it was so fun to hear her humor, but just she was just speaking truth, man, about how
mhm.
when we look in the mirror, we're like, oh, in my mind, I think of my maybe 20-year-old self and not my 85-year-old self. And just her humor around it. She was like, where's my lipstick? I don't know who this old woman is looking back at me in the mirror. And I loved it. We had a really good laugh about it and then just, shared that moment together. But
And I
it
think
was,
that's
it
the
was
thing.
really
You get
sweet.
those moments when you spend enough time with people who are older. Like it's
Mhm.
not something where you just go and you expect to visit for 10 minutes and you're going to get that. When you spend more time with people, you are going to get those fun moments that you really treasure and remember. So I think
Mhm,
that's really neat.
mhm. There's a conversation around resiliency. And as we live life, we've had to overcome more things. So we've had to build resiliency, or we hope to build resiliency. What have you learned about that from your grandparents?
I think from every single older person that I meet, and when I get to hear
Mhm,
their story and I get to hear what they've been through. Like, I think it's not necessarily that they're telling me you can do it, you can make it
Mhm.
through hard things, you can do hard things. I think it's just, it kind of like soaks in that message, right? That
Mhm.
lesson, because I see, for example, my grandma walk 2 hours to get to the hospital to have a baby. I'm like, whoa, okay. And that was when she was, in her 20s or something like that. And then
Mhm.
I learn more about other trials that they've been through, or how, they had to come over to the US and not know how to speak English, or trouble with certain jobs, or not having enough. Like, I remember my grandma saying that after she had a baby, she just had an egg. Like, that was it. So I think it gives me that perspective, a long-term perspective, but also perspective to see that, like, yeah, I can do hard things. And just seeing somebody who's older shows you that you can do it because they have lived through it. I think about like widows. And I always think, like, I was just thinking about, because I know one widow who, she lost her husband at a young age and now she's older. And I was thinking, wow, just the fact that she's here is like an encouragement. If she shared that story with a younger widow, a wife who recently lost her spouse, and probably thinks like, I'm never going to make it, and feels so
Yeah.
hopeless. Like, just seeing an older woman who has made it, and seeing that person is just an encouragement, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's why I was sharing that when we listen and hear the stories of other older people, like, we realize that we can do hard things. We're just encouraged by it.
It's so true. They're not necessarily saying you will be resilient, but they've gone before us and we've seen that overcoming. And while it might not have been a perfect journey and it was hard, you still make it to that other side. And
Yeah,
just seeing and witnessing that. Yeah.
I think that's what helps us to build resilience too, understanding
Mhm.
reality, that like, it isn't a
Mhm.
clean, okay, they did it, and yes, but that it was messy. And that is a part of life. And sometimes I think nowadays, I've met a lot of people, like younger people, who maybe they feel hopeless, but I think it's in their minds. They sometimes have an unrealistic expectation of certain
Mhm.
things. But I think having my grandparents there, and even my parents, like, just somebody older than you come to learn what to expect. So even like when I get older, or when I am nearing the end of my life, I know what to expect because I've seen it.
Mhm.
But if you haven't seen it, that, I think that's where the loss is. Like, when you don't
Yeah.
have older people in your life, your view of the future may not be realistic, and it
Mhm.
can be harder because of that.
Yeah, we fear the unknown. I think when we can see what's ahead of us, then we're more likely to take it on, okay, because we know what's coming, we can know what to expect. Yeah.
And we have examples that,
Mhm.
even if we don't follow that example, we can learn from that example.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
think that's why sometimes, well, you always hear people talk about the wisdom of the older generation. And while it's so true, they have wisdom, but I think people tend to think it's like the wisdom that they speak and that they share. But I think in being around older adults, we just, like I said, it just soaks in. We
Mhm.
learn it just by watching it. And maybe we can't even
Mhm.
articulate it, but we
Mhm.
learn it. And
Yeah.
it helps us to build that resiliency.
Right, it does. And sometimes I think too, like everything is a teacher. And I always think of, even if I might not follow a certain path that someone maybe in front of me did, I'm still learning and I'm observing, and it's teaching me, okay, it's maybe teaching me I do want to do something like that, or it's teaching me that I don't.
Yes,
But it's all
exactly.
really beautiful lessons.
No,
Yeah.
that's exactly what it is. And I
Hmm.
worked in the fitness center as one of my first jobs in wellness. And I saw the product of what happens when you don't focus on your health, when you don't exercise, and regularly. Though I saw what happens at the end
Hmm.
of your life. And that helps you
Hmm.
when you have that long-term perspective. So
I found so many people also want to have conversation with loved ones or older adults in their life, but they shy maybe away from it because they don't always know how to interact. For some of us, it's really comfortable, and for other people, it's not. It's just dependent on, right, our lived experiences. What are some good conversation starters, or what are some tips that you would offer on how to start those conversations and what to talk about?
Yeah, so I think sometimes I mean, having people often feel awkward, right? Like starting to, when they're talking with older adults and they're trying to think of the perfect question. I don't think there's a perfect question. I think it's just saying hi and time, right? The more you talk to somebody, think of a normal relationship or even like a dating relationship, or, if you're trying to get to know somebody, then you would find out more about them. You would ask them questions, and then it would feel more natural as time went on. But I think sometimes we expect to have like, okay, what 2 questions can I ask that will bring it all out? Here's the thing. I think 2 things. Okay. I think one is a cheerful greeting. Like, even if you don't have a conversation, if you see a neighbor and you're like, good morning, Mr. Smith. And I think you probably have done this, working with your residents, that like puts you as a person who's safe to talk to and cheerful, and they want to be around you. So just having a great greeting to start off with, being cheerful. But then I think sometimes when you feel awkward, or you like, choose the wrong word and can't figure it out, that's actually a good thing because it makes you vulnerable. And I think older adults often, they're the vulnerable ones. They're the ones who already feel like, they don't want to be a burden. And so you help them show that you're a safe person to talk to, that you're not all put together. You're not coming here to give them, like, tell them how things should be done. You're coming with a humble heart, and you just want to get to know them. So I think it's just kind of the effort that they'll see that really will speak to them and really show them, wow, this person really, maybe they had no idea what they were saying, but they want to get to know me. And then you come back again and again, and you're going to find that they will appreciate, I think they would just appreciate that you are there.
Taking the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always found too where I might not always know what to say, but I found that if I just asked a lot of questions, it would spur conversation that would maybe lead to other conversation. And then I just became more comfortable. And then they would ask questions back. And it was a good starting point of, where are you from? And what did you like to travel? And, just thinking of all the questions that I could think of at the time.
Yeah. I think it's just about, even now, it's not like it's not like I'm a master at talking with older people, just that I know that when I ask questions, I'm going to learn something. And then it's just the persistence of asking questions, knowing that there is a story, not just one story, like 100 million stories and cool stories that I want to know, like, about this person. So it's just about asking questions. And I like to say, when you ask them, you honor them.
That's a really beautiful statement. What have you found is the best living arrangement for older adults in all of your work that you've done?
Yeah, so I worked in senior living for a number of years, and I worked at one of the best ones, I would say. And then I also live with my grandparents. And a lot of times people will say, oh, like, I can't live with I can't live with my loved one or my aging parent. And what I always want to tell people is, like, you don't have to live with someone to love them, but you do need to include them in your life. And so if you end up having to make that decision to move your loved one to a nursing home or an assisted living, like, don't be so hard on yourself. You can still give them a great quality of life. You can still value them and cherish them. And it will take effort, right? But living with people is hard too, very hard, in fact. So you don't have to live with them to love them, but I would say include them in your life, make them a part of your life, and visit them often, support them wherever they are.
You've worked in really great communities. And what do the best communities offer older adults in your experience?
Okay, I think community, because I think community is huge. And I think it's hard as people age because they lose some of their best friends, they lose their spouses, and they want companionship, they want friends, they want people who understand what they've been through. And then I think another thing is just the opportunity to grow and learn new things. So for example, the community that I started working in after college, like they had a wood shop and a garden, a garden and all these different clubs and activities. And I think what behind it all is the fact that was really neat was that residents would come, and even if they had never ever done woodwork, they could still learn to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times, even older people I meet think, okay, I've never done this before, so I can't do it. I'm already like 80. Mm-hmm. But the cool thing was seeing people learn new things, learn how to, like my dad passed away, I think 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And my mom never, ever gardened. And just a few years ago, she learned to garden, and this whole new part of her has come out. Wow. So I think when communities or even families, we can really encourage this. And even if if you have a parent who is now a widow or widower and they're learning something new with their grandchild, like that is fun to know that even if you are past a certain age, you can still learn, you can still grow, mm-hmm. you can still learn how to crochet or play piano or learn a new language. Like, I think that is what we need, because people think that as you get older that they're just supposed to like sit there and die off. Mm-hmm. But we still have life to live, and mm-hmm. every single day we have, it's a gift where we can learn new things, where we can experience new experiences and meet new people, have new relationships, all of that.
Would always say it's like that you have got the hope of something to look forward to also, because I know for me, it's important in my life that I have things that I can look forward to. And mm-hmm. so that whatever that is for anybody, as long as that's in place, I think we need that hope. Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, there's really no reason for you to wake mm-hmm. up in the morning.
Mm-hmm. If you found that there are certain things that really lead to contentment for older adults, or even not older adults, anybody, contentment, right? That's a big question too.
Yeah, no, I think gratitude. So my grandma, one of the reasons why she made such an impact on my life is because she lived to 102, and she was thankful the entire time. So even though, her son, my dad, passed away before she did, and right before she turned 100, yet at the same time, she was able to give thanks. She would always thank God for things. She would thank people for things. Even, when she was no longer able to, in her last few weeks of life, she wasn't able to say a lot. She was able to thank somebody for helping her get water, or, and so I think that gratitude. And then I think the contentment can come, and this is part of gratitude, is the reflection. And I think that's why when people embrace aging, like, it allows us to reflect on the goodness that we have experienced in the past, but also the good things that we have now. And that is where gratitude comes from. Mm-hmm. We have to reflect. And I think in our culture, and especially, you're a mom, I'm a mom, mm-hmm. we lead busy lives. And I think we can get grumpy when we don't slow down and reflect, okay, these are the good things that we have right now. Otherwise, naturally, the bad things, the negative things that happen to us are going to take over. So I think it's really the reflection, the gratitude that can come from slowing down and reflecting.
Mm-hmm. It's so important to do that. I had a friend say to me the other day, there were different things happening, right? Life is busy. And she challenged me and said, I think you need to slow down and celebrate all the goodness. Yeah. Because now you're moving on and rushing to these other things. And it was like, oh, the moment I totally got called out, but I needed to hear that, because then I did take the next couple of days to try to slow down and have the gratitude and reflect and try to celebrate the things that have been happening, rather than just rushing on to the next thing and bypassing it.
Yeah. Like my dream one day is to create a journal, like a birthday journal, and maybe somebody will create this after this, and that's fine. But Because I think a lot of times you'll see like gratitude, right? But I feel like I would love to create a journal that has like growth and gratitude. Because
Mm,
I think if we look and think about even just this last year, how have I grown? And
mm,
I feel like it shows us, wow, like I'm so
yeah.
glad I got 1 year older because I
Mhm,
learned this. I was sharing how
mhm,
I'm learning how to do small business. And that's
mm.
something I have never, ever, ever done. So if I look back on this year, that's a way that I've grown. And that makes me like really happy.
Yeah.
Like I need this year.
Right, right.
So if
Yes.
we remember that, the growth and the gratitude, I think is powerful.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was my dad had told me to write down when those little wins
Yes.
so that when times are really hard, you can go back and remember, okay, actually, this really important thing happened and this conversation took place that I was really excited about, or whatever that was, because it kind of then can carry you through the harder times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
I love that you talk about the dignity of risk. I had not heard the term like that specifically, and I loved those words together. I've felt the emotions around it where you know that certain things should happen because of the dignity. What does that mean, and why is it important that we honor that?
So I would say I got that. I learned that from this book called The Silverado Story. Have you ever heard of it?
I don't think I have. I
Oh,
got to
you
write that
should
down.
definitely read it. Okay, so
Okay, I'm writing it
Silverado
down.
communities, and they have Silverado hospice, and I think there are
Mm,
more on the West Coast. But they wrote this
mhm,
book, and they have a lot of communities serving people with dementia. And so the whole idea was that as humans, one of the things that marks human being is that we have the ability to fail and succeed. And so I think we don't think about it, but it is a gift, the fact that we can make choices, right?
mm,
And so I think as people get older, one of the things that is often gets taken from them is their choices. So for example, I may know that eating potato chips and like really fried food is bad for me, but if I make that choice to do it, and nobody says that I can't do it. I make that choice. So throughout our lives, like we have we have those choices, and that is there's like a freedom to that. But as somebody gets older, a lot of times we might say, no, you cannot get up out of your bed anymore. This is not safe. And I think even though safety is important, sometimes we kind of lose focus and we focus more on safety and forget to give someone dignity.
mm,
But it is really a tough thing to figure out. Sometimes that giving an older person, especially if it's like our parent or grandparent, dignity, sometimes that does take more sacrifice on our part. I think in the long run, it's really beneficial, but you do have to weigh like, is this something that I can handle? Because, for example, if your older loved one may not want to wear an adult diaper and
mhm,
they may be okay with having an accident. If it happens just every once in a while, that's probably something that you might be able to handle as someone who's caring for them. But if it happens every day, right, you really have to balance and see, and kind of see what capacity do you have to help
mhm.
them, to give them that dignity. And I would say to be able to do that, you really need more support. So the more
Yeah.
people you have in a person's village, in the older loved one's village, and that is going to allow you to offer them more dignity.
Yeah, I just loved that conversation around it and just the reminder to do that, to try to balance it well and to uphold that dignity. There are so many great things that you're doing with your book. So we'll direct people in our episode description and on our website of where to find that. But also, you have a podcast and you've created a guide. Tell us what you're up to and where we can learn more.
Sure. So I am active on mostly on Instagram at Isabel Tom. And then I do speaking here and there, but mainly what I'm working on right now is I have the Value of Wrinkles podcast, and I like to interview older adults and kind of hear their stories, but also learn from them. So that's just something I really enjoy. And then I recently launched a new course called Prepare to Care: What to Do While Your Aging Parent or Grandparent is Still Healthy. And so that is one way for people who are thinking and seeing, noticing decline in their loved ones to start early, to plan ahead, because I really believe and know that it takes planning to offer good care. And if you don't plan, you can't expect to just show up and be able to love your elder well. So that is a course that I recently launched, and I hope, your listeners get a chance to check it out.
And we can find that on your website. Is that correct?
Yes, you can go to isabeltom.com/course.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This was just a fun conversation. I so enjoyed having you and meeting you finally. So thank you for the time today.
Thank you, Nicole. It was so great to be here.
Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.